Hey guys, it's been a while. I've been not making videos. So I recently put out this song on Bandcamp, and in the song I use like this Aphex Twin style type of breakbeat, and I just want to come on here and show you guys how you can do something similar in FL Studio. I'm just gonna be talking about the drums today. Maybe at some point I'll talk about melody or bass or pads or anything like that, but for now, just drums. So I started with a little melody I got here. I usually start with melody. I feel like if I don't start with a melody, then it's harder to get drums to fit in with the melody. I have to get the melody to fit with the drums, which is a lot more difficult in my opinion. But if you want, you can start with drums. But this is what the melody sounds like. So it's simple. There's nothing crazy going on. It's just a descending pattern pretty much. The rhythm is not exactly there's a lot of syncopation. It's not exactly fully on beat, but simple. Just one note at a time, a lot of space, and then I added a little reverb to make it, fill up that space. Alright, so the first step of making a breakbeat is you're going to want to choose your sounds. Now, I've already done that, but if you don't know where to find sounds, a great resource is there's this guy on Reddit who uploaded every drum kit, just sounds of every drum kit. And if you want to get an Aphex Twin style sound, you could probably use drum kits from here because, he was making music in the day where you would only have the option to use a drum kit. You couldn't, download something from Reddit. The drum kits that he used a lot were the TR-808s and the TR-909. These are both used a lot on Drux. They have that like simple but like really clean sound, which is good for fast, sort of sounds. The drum kit that I used for the majority of these sounds is called the Cheetah MD16, which I'm pretty sure he used something similar later in his career. But it's still got that drum kitty sound. It still sounds like a drum kit. And so here's the sounds that I select. So the sounds we're going to be using today, just a kick, I have a hi-hat, I have a kabasa, I have a snare, and a rim, and then a bass drum. So the kick is just something really punchy. The hi-hat, make sure it's clean and it's bright, and it's not very long, it's short. And then the bass drum I have really deep. None of the other drum sounds are this deep, so you kind of need something to fill in that low end. And the kabasa is kind of similar to the hi-hat, except it just has the attack, so it fades in a little bit more, so it's a softer kind of sound. And then for the snare, something that he does a lot on Drux is he uses these really loud and aggressive, like noisy snares like this. And it's kind of like, it's an interesting sound, and it makes it more aggressive. And then just this ride, which not sure if I'm going to use, but that's definitely something he used, especially in the 90s on a lot of his, like Richard D. James album and stuff like that, and Come to Daddy. Alright, so once you've got all your sounds loaded in, I'm using FPC here. You're going to want to make sure that they cut themselves off, or they cut each other off. They're all part of the same choke group. Basically what that means, and I'll demonstrate here. Notice how if I play this part, the sound plays in full, but if I play this part, the snare gets cut off. This is a result of the software he would use. He used these things called trackers, which basically would line up a bunch of beats in a row, and you could only play one drum sound at a time. And that's another thing that I'll get into later, how to get that one drum set at a time thing. But yeah, make sure they cut each other off. And if you want to put them on the same choke group, which is what it's called on FPC here, once you have sounds loaded up, just put the cut and the cut by of every single sound of the same group. So for me, I just did 0. So every sound should cut itself off, except the bass drum. I didn't put on a cut group because it's more of an instrument than a drum, and if I did put it on a cut group, then it would not be able to play at all. It would just be the punchy part at the beginning and not the actual bass. So that's something that I did. Alright, so drums. The first thing I do is I always line up a hi-hat or a cabasa pattern. Hi-hats and cabasas, you know, in terms of like the Aphex Twin, the Tuss style sound, are just like you can use them interchangeably, but what you want to have is like a fast, repetitive pattern like this. Something like this. Something like this. And what you can do to get this is just lay out note all the way, and then press Alt U, and then put the time right in the middle, and it should be at the speed. Set the BPM to between 140 to 170. Above that and below that, it's a different sound. But yeah, that's usually what he has on his beats. So once you have the cabasas lined up here, you're going to want to go in and add snares on the 2 and the 4 like this. And then, like I was talking about earlier, if you want like only one sound to be playing at a time, and this you have to do manually, just go through and delete, every time you add a sound, delete the other sounds in that row, so it sounds like this. And then repeat that pattern throughout the entire section. Alright, next is kicks. Now, with kicks, if you noticed earlier, I had a bass drum and a kick. Those are kind of the same thing. So I would have a higher, punchier kick, and then a lower, deeper bass drum that, like I said, had the cut turned off, and then layer them. And the pattern that Aphex Twin uses for a lot of his beats is sort of like, it's not very complicated. You don't want to do anything like jazzy or, you know, super syncopated, because when it's this fast, you really just want to have everything on the fourth beats, like I'm doing here. So I'm just gonna go through and add kicks, you know, on these little fourth beat blocks here. And then just layer this pattern with the kicks. Alright, that's pretty much the basic pattern. If you really want to, you don't need to add any extra drums. You know, like rides, like I showed earlier. You could make it complex with just this pattern, just these sounds. So next I'm going to talk about like little variations you can do to the sounds to give it, you know, that like fast breakbeat style. So one thing that Aphex Twin does in his sound, and basically anyone who makes a breakbeat, is they'll take a simple pattern like I just made here, and then they'll edit that pattern for each section, for each bar. So here are a few ways you can edit it to make it sound interesting. What I do is I'd go through on like random, you know, maybe just parts that sound good on little hi-hats or cabasas, and chopping them maybe in half or in quarters, like this. you know, just giving a little variation. And then I could add one that's like a little bit more chopped, like this. And then you could also go through and add like extra accent snares. Like for example, I could replace this. And with these, I would lower the velocity a little bit and just make them a little quieter. Because otherwise it's going to kind of intrude on the rhythm. So just something like this. And yeah, I mean, at that point, you could basically just repeat that for the entire section, and you know, it would sound pretty interesting. So this is what it would sound like overlaid over the melody. Okay, so now that's simple variations, and obviously there's more complex variations. I don't just want it to repeat this pattern the entire time. Of course, you could make a new pattern, but if you want to make it more interesting in the same section, you could like disrupt the pattern. So introduce, you know, introduce that rhythm at the beginning that we created, and then later sort of disrupt the rhythm. Like, for example, I could go through and like offset this kick, or maybe let the snare play out, or add an extra snare at the beginning, or sort of like cut things out. Like, I notice how I'm not even listening to it yet. You know, people always say you want to make music with your ears and not your eyes, but part of this, honestly, is just doing random things and experimenting with what sounds good. And once you've done it for long enough, you'll kind of get a sense for where to put things without even really having to think about it. But I would advise trying to make things without listening to them, and then listening to them, and then trying over and adjusting until, you know, it sounds good. Okay, that sounds like complete shit. So yeah, notice how that sounds like complete shit, right? Like, there's no problem with that. I can just start over. I can just Control Z. But yeah, let's do something else with the rhythm here, because clearly that wasn't working. Try it, maybe adding some more accent snares, and just do a lot. I'm just gonna do a lot of things I was talking about earlier, like the little chops here on the hi-hats. And one thing you'll notice I'm doing here is when I chop something, especially with a lot of little chops on FL Studio, if you go to the first note on the velocity and you right-click and drag in a straight line, you'll create sort of this like linear downwards or upwards pattern. And always be messing with the velocity, because that's how you create, like, you know, variation and in like the emphasis and the feeling of the drums. So yeah, I mean, basically you can just repeat this for the entire section until you get like kind of a sound that you want. I did the same thing in this song that I released. It's called P-Bis 2, and I used this melody and these sounds, but I used kind of a different, I used a different rhythm. Obviously, I made it separately. Alright, this is what that sounds like. I'm going to stop right there. I do have a lot of like, you know, extra doodads like the bass and the pads and stuff on this, but the basic drums is basically just the basic drums are just exactly what I was talking about earlier. I have a really simple pattern on the kick and the bass drum, and you know, that same sort of like quarter beat, well, you know, quarter of a beat rhythm on the cabasas, and it sounds like the drum, just the drums sound like this. I began this with this section of just a simple rhythm with slight variation. You know, I added a few accent snares here and there, and I chopped some of the cabasas. But then I come in here and I sort of subvert the rhythm a little bit. I take out some of the kicks, take out some of the snares. You know, I do something like this. There's no hi-hats or cabasas in this area. And then as it goes on, I do this more and more until the end. The rhythm is barely recognizable. You know, it's like dementia. You know, you've completely forgotten what it sounds like, and it sort of like collapses like this. And so I was just kind of placing stuff randomly at this point, but it sounds interesting, right? I just listened to it over and over again, and I was like, well, where could I put an extra kick? Where could I remove a kick? Yeah, and then I got that kind of sound over the melody. And then I went back to a normal rhythm with a hi-hat here. So this isn't that much different from what I was doing earlier. It's just, you know, with a hi-hat. But what I did have here is it's like it starts normal rhythm and then collapses into a weird rhythm, and then in the next section it starts again, right? But with like a new sound. And that's something that Aphex Twin does a lot, is he like switches sounds, especially on like drucks and stuff. Alright, so that's basically it. I don't know, maybe you found that interesting or helpful. Subscribe if you liked, and maybe I'll do another video in the future on more stuff like this or something similar. Thanks for watching. Bye.